Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Caleb King. I'm a software developer, and this is our introduction to basic syntax in Java. Now, what I'll tell you is Java is not my favorite programming language. However, it's the one I can't get away from. Every job I've ever had, there's been some type of Java, whether it's Java and Spring, vanilla Java, Java and JBoss, Java using batch jobs. There's just so many different edge cases and use cases for this language that knowing the language, understanding the fundamentals of it can really position you. So if you want to land one of these high paid, top quality engineering roles of some of these great tech companies, Java is a great place to start. Because like I said, when you're 27 years old, you've been around the block for a long time. And some people are either trying to move away from it, move towards it, or just understand it's not going away anytime soon. So what you need to know for this is Java is statically typed and an object-oriented programming language. And when we're talking about the fundamentals, there's a lot of things I think people overlook.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
So the first thing I want to talk about are data types. Now there's really two types of data types. There's primitive and object/reference types. Now primitive types are just the simplest form of data. I mean, it's what you need to do 2 + 2 = 4. And Java provides these types for you to use for specific scenarios. So integer values are int, long, byte, short, but they're usually solid numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. However, there's edge cases where maybe you're making an app that takes in money. You don't want a whole number. You want a floating point value. So something like float or double, where it can represent $20.05 or something of that nature. There's also char, because you'll see later you can use a string class, but let's say my name is Caleb. Well, I don't want to know your full name. I just want to know what's the first letter of everybody's first name. That's where char would come into place. So you can see here I use C to represent the first letter in my name. And then there's logical values. Does Caleb actually know how to code, or is this all a front? True or false? The world may never know. Now those are primitive types. And on the other hand, there's reference types. And reference types to me, they pretty much just contain values of other objects. But what really makes them different is that they have a special value null, in the absence that there is no value there. Primitive types cannot be null. This is something I want to call out now, because I promise you, you will be working on an application.
Okay.
And somebody's going to make something an int when it should have been a big int. I'll show you that later. And they'll be like, I didn't know it could be null. And it's like, yes, it can be null. But now that you didn't make it null, we have problems. That's another story time for you guys later. So let's talk about one of the things you need to understand when we're working with Java. We're talking about declaring variables. So here in this code example, what I want to show you guys with a few different things. One, these are primitive types. This is a reference type. If you notice, because I use JetBrains, and depending on your theme, your colors might be different, but you'll notice all the primitive types are one color and all the reference types or objects are another color. Even when I hover over string, I get this huge pop-up. And I'm not going to lie, when you first start off your career, this kind of stuff is intimidating.
Oh, God! Oh, God!
But as you play with it, as you practice with it, as we break it down for you, it actually becomes super helpful. So really what I want to highlight here is you can't dive into any of these because this is the lowest it goes. But I can dive into string, and how you dive into, if you're on IntelliJ, if you're on a Mac, command click, but if you're on a PC, control click. And this will take you to the string class within the Java Lang package. And as you can tell here, we have a string class which implements a lot of different interfaces. And we'll talk about that later, but that is how you pretty much know. Reference type, you can go a little bit further, whereas in a primitive type, this is as far as you can go. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is when we're declaring variables, we must specify its name, also known as the identifier and the type. So here, when we say we declared variables, we said the type is int, the variable or the identifier is num. Now, an identifier can be any name, any length consisting of letters, digits, underscores, or dollar signs. It just has to follow these rules. So like I just said, has to start with a letter, an underscore, or a dollar sign. Can't be a reserved keyword. Can't be true, false, or null. And you'd be very surprised how so many people want to make those variable names when it's like you just can't do it. So just get in the practice of not doing it. Also, when you're making variables, they should be meaningful. So if you're making a car class, call it car. Don't call it something like, don't call it like, oh, my baby Zane.
Oh!
And it's like, what does that mean? Well, I call all my cars Zane. Well, no one knows that. Like, just call it a car so anybody who comes in can understand and pick up right away.
Nice.
Difference between declaring a variable and then initializing a variable. So this is how you declare. You just simply say the type and the identifier name. You don't even have to assign it a value. But to initialize, you want to specify the type, the name, and then what are you going to set it to? So, for example, we can say another one. And we're going to be saying another one is set to 12. There's going to be use cases where you want to do this. There's going to be use cases where you want to do this. So let's move on to arrays. So an array is a reference type that can store a collection of values of a specific type. The general syntax for declaring an array is type, identifier, new type, and the length. So here is an example. So I made a numbers array. We're saying it's type int, and we're saying this. Let's make 100 spots. Now, one thing you need to know when you're working with Java, array indexes start at 0. So the first element is at index 0, whereas in the second element is at index 1, and so on. So additionally, you'll want to make sure, like, hey, what's the length of an array? And that actually catches a lot of people up. But what I want to at least show you here is if you want to at least get the first spot of the array, this is how you would do it. You would say numbers and 0, which would be the first spot. It's like, give me, or in this case, we're assigning the first spot to 1. We're assigning the second spot to 2. But I left this commented out for now. And you'll see why in a minute, because we're going to go into the main class here and actually write some real life examples. Now, that's just a high level of arrays. The reason I want to at least give this like its own dedicated slide here is when you think of the FANG companies, the Leak Code Questions, Algo Expert, all those guys, like when you're in a software engineering interview and they're asking you, you know, algorithm, data structure, a lot of times they're giving you a set of data and you as a developer usually convert it to an array. It's not always an array, but you want to get very familiar with arrays because it's just a way to group data and manipulate it so you can accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Now, when we're talking about identifiers or making variables, we mentioned that Java has reserved keywords. I didn't get a comprehensive list for you, but I just wanted to at least list down what they are and what they really mean. These keywords allow the Java programming language to function and to run. So, package is a keyword, public, class, private, static, main, new, instance of. All these keywords, just know you can't use them as identifiers. So let's actually dive into something that's a little bit more fun, but a little bit more complicated. If you're not great at math, then I apologize, but this is the one part that makes programming. Is Java supports basic arithmetic operators. So whether you're doing, remember, like Java is used for programs, web applications, supercomputers, so it should be able to handle math, right? Part of that math is just understanding the syntax here. So I try to categorize them into three, but there's arithmetic, which you can do plus, minus, multiplication, division, modulus. I'll show you two examples of where you want to do modulus. But the one thing I want to call out is you'll see people do this, and that's wrong. If you want to do 5 times 5, it's not 5 times x, it's 5 times 5. Division is pretty obvious, and I'll show you a modulus one, but that's like the one I have noticed people who hop in and have no idea. And it's like, oh yeah, multiplication has to be this. Now, in addition to arithmetic operators, Java supports the following logical operators for evaluating Boolean expressions. So double ampersand represents and, double pipe represents or, and I say bang, some people say exclamation point, but that represents not. Which leads us into our last type of operator, the comparison operator. Now, really between these three operators, you can build a lot of great programming, like a lot of great programs with these. Like this is really the core fundamentals of what you need to actually start building programs. But comparison operators, less than or equal to, just written just like this. So let me zoom in for you guys. And you'll see some editors have like some syntax sugar. So they might make this look better than actually this. But for most editors, you're going to see when it's greater than or equal to, it's going to be the caret equal sign. If you want to compare two objects or two items, you want to use the double equal sign. Remember, we only use one to assign, use double to compare. And then if you want to confirm two things are not equal, then you would do bang equal sign. So let's actually look at some code. That way you can actually put some of these ideas into practice. So one of the things you're going to see a lot of the times is concatenating two different strings. So we're going to take my first name, combine it with my last name, and print it out to the console. So what we're going to do here is create a first name variable, a last name variable. We're going to create an output, which is pretty much we're saying output is equal to first name plus, and we add a space because these are strings. And we're saying first name, give me a space, plus my last name. And we're going to print that out to the console here. Now, that's all we need. We're going to hit play, run main, and we should see here's my first output, Caleb King. Boom! Exactly what we need. So that's an arithmetic. That's a very simple one where we just concatenated two strings. We add, and really if you think about it, this is a string. Even this space is a string. And then we're saying add the last string. So let's now show you an example with a logical operator. So for here, let's say using that modulus operator that I mentioned before, here's a perfect example when you might want to use it. There's going to be times where it's like, hey, is this number divisible by these two numbers? It's a very common interview question you'll see. Okay, so let's talk about logical operators. This is one of those use cases that when people have never seen it before, they can't think of how to cover it. But here's a real interview, real life scenario. You might be asked, hey, is this number divisible by 2 and 3? How about 4 and 5? How about 6 and 7? And so on and so forth. So one of the ways you can do this is, let's see here. Let's create a number variable. We're going to set it to 6. And here, this is where we're using modulus. So we're pretty much saying if the number is divisible by 2 and the number is divisible by 3, and the reason we're saying equal to 0 is because remember, modulus, also known as remainder. If there is no remainder, which means it is divisible. So you can say, is 6 divisible by 2 or 3? If we run that, what do you think we're getting in a console? 6 is divisible by 2 and 3. Very true. If we were to go the step further, so here we did and, here we're doing or. So is 6 divisible by 2 or divisible by 5? We run that. We know 6 is divisible by 2, but not 5. But because it has that order, that's totally fine. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you, because we've written a good amount of code, but the last thing I wanted to show you is when you're actually working in an enterprise environment, in a startup, in a mid-sized company, you have a lot of great tools where you don't have to do these manual steps anymore. But I just want to show you how you used to have to do it. So you guys can see when I run the application, I'm clicking on the start, I'm hitting run, and then underneath the scene, it's doing all this magic. Before this was a thing, you would have to go into, and let's update that later. So one hello world, you would have to do a Java C to compile it, and then a Java to run the program. And then it would give you all the output. And that's just way too much work. But I do want to show you, if you're using an editor, you can run it up here. You can run it from the main class. You can run it from the main method. If you have the MacBook with a touch bar, you can hit the play button. That's probably the only time the touch bar has come in handy for me, was hitting that play button or the debug button. But yeah, this is lesson number 1. Really, in conclusion, we've looked at some of the basic syntax of Java. And then this is all available on GitHub for you if you want to look into it yourself, you want to play around with it. But really what I wanted to do was at least give you the key fundamental building blocks to actually build a program. And just a recap, we talked about data types, primitives versus reference. We talked about declaring versus initializing. We talked about arrays and how it's like a collection of data. We talked about Java keywords. We talked about operators, arithmetic, logical, and comparison. And then after all of that, we actually wrote some Java code. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Check out more coming soon, as we're trying our best to crank out as much content for you guys. If you're enjoying it, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. But that's all I got for you for now. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.